Texas Republican Congressman Michael Cloud. So good morning, Congressman. This all comes after that report released by the White House Domestic Policy Council revealed extreme left-wing bias at the National Museum of American History. What do you expect to learn at today's hearing?
Well, hopefully we'll find out the why behind the what. It doesn't take anything more than the casual observer to walk through the museum and see this isn't your father's or your mother's American History Museum. And it's just as troubling not only what's in there and what you can find, you know, some of the drag shows, questionable books for kids, some very explicit, but also what's missing. You know, you would think on the 250th anniversary of American history, maybe there would be this huge exhibit on the Declaration of Independence, not to be found. And so it's troubling the direction that this is taken. And of course, you know, you can find tucked away in corners, you know, Jefferson's desk, some of the great treasures of our history.
Right.
But it's not the thing that you would think it would be for being the history of American, the Museum of American History.
Yeah, exactly. And we know the Smithsonian continues to deny any wrongdoing. As its spokesperson says, quote, for more than 180 years, the Smithsonian has served the American public with nonpartisan and independent scholarship, and we remain committed to doing so. Do you believe that? And are there specific things in the Smithsonian right now that concern you and appear biased? I know you mentioned a few, but what are we talking about here? Is the entire thing biased?
Well, it's trouble. You know, it's different between like what's on the end cap, so to speak,
Right.
the first things you see versus what's, you know, tucked away behind in an exhibit if you really, really look for it. You know, I went through the museum recently and I just was like, hey, let me see if I can find anything on John Adams. It was much more difficult than you would think. You know, some of the heroes of American history, amazing stories that we would all share. You know, I think of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, you know, dying on the anniversary of our nation. You know,
Right.
That would be a good thing to talk about, how, you know, Adams said Jefferson survives, you know, his last words. You know, amazing stories. George Washington surviving battle, being shot multiple times, you know, through his coat, and 2 horses knocked down. You know, all these amazing stories, you don't find them in the Museum of American History. And the question is where do the American people go if they can't go to their own history museum to find out America's history?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot, you know, there seems to be a lot focused on, you know, the social juxtapositions of culture and those kind of things over the last 20, 30 years maybe. But where's that story that unites us, that e pluribus unum, where we say out of many became one, this great nation that's done amazing things for the people who live here and being that city on a hill for the world.
Yeah, great point.
Congressman, I do want to shift gears here real quick to what's going on down the street from the Smithsonian on Capitol Hill. I know today a big vote happening on reconciliation, possibly moving forward on the CR to keep the government open through Democrat shutdown attempts past the election. Can you tell us where things stand right now?
Yeah, one thing we're very wary of is when we've seen the Dems do this before, they're willing to create chaos if it does anything to derail the president's agenda. And so we're very wary that we could, as we move toward the midterms, be looking at a shutdown. And so we're going to do what we can to make sure that we keep the government funded. We can pass a CR. You know, we'll still be working the appropriations process to make sure we get those bills through and the new policy objectives and all the things that need to be done to fund our military. It's a very critical time in our country to make sure we meet that demand. So there's a lot of work to be done, but let's first take shutdown off the table as we move forward and then begin to work the reconciliation process as well, which also needs to include the Save America Act.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Congressman Michael Cloud, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.